Hey there, good to see you again. Merry Christmas, my friend. I hope you're having a wonderful holiday season. Just between you and me, this is usually the time of year when things slow down a bit in politics, when everyone takes a breath and enjoys some eggnog, but not this year. Not with what just happened. And before we dive in, I've got to ask you something really important. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, could you do me a favor? Hit that subscribe button right now, because trust me, with what's coming in the next few weeks, you're going to want to be here for every single update. Plus, I need the numbers to prove to my producer that people actually care about this stuff. So help me out here, would you? All right, let's get into it. So here's what everyone's talking about right now. Donald Trump has once again threatened NATO, and this time Europe isn't just worried. They're essentially hitting the panic button. We're talking about a national security strategy document that dropped earlier this month that has European leaders scrambling like I've never seen before. And look, I know what you're thinking, because I thought the same thing at first. Hasn't Trump been threatening NATO since like 2016? Yes, but this is different. This isn't just Trump being Trump on Twitter at 3 in the morning. This is an official White House document, 33 pages long, that basically tells Europe they're on their own. The document says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that America is done being Atlas holding up the world. The days of the United States protecting everybody are over. Now, when European leaders read this, their reaction was basically the political equivalent of seeing your dad pack a suitcase and head for the door. They started using words like alarmed, shocked, and one former European ambassador actually said it reads like a far-right pamphlet. That's not me saying that. That's a diplomat. And here's the kicker. Russia loved it. The Kremlin actually came out and said the strategy corresponds in many ways to their own vision. When your biggest adversary is giving you a thumbs up, that's probably not a great sign. So let me give you some context here, because this is important. On December 4th, the Trump administration released its national security strategy for 2025. Now, every administration does this. It's basically the game plan for how America deals with the world. But this one is wildly different from anything we've seen in decades. The strategy essentially says that Europe needs to take care of itself, that NATO members need to spend 5% of their GDP on defense, not 2%. 5. And it criticizes Europe pretty harshly, saying the continent is facing civilizational erasure and might be unrecognizable in 20 years. Those are strong words. The document also makes it clear that Trump wants to normalize relations with Russia and end the Ukraine war on terms that, frankly, a lot of Europeans think would be a disaster for Ukraine. The strategy talks about reestablishing strategic stability with Russia, which sounds nice until you realize it basically means letting Putin have significant influence over how this whole thing ends. Now, according to reports, Trump has privately threatened to pull the U.S. out of NATO multiple times. There's actually a law that Congress passed that requires a 2/3 Senate vote for the president to leave NATO. But Trump's approach seems to be, if I can't leave, I'll just make it meaningless. And that's what's terrifying European leaders right now. If you're enjoying this breakdown, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel, and it lets me know you want more of this kind of analysis. All right, back to it. So European countries have been trying to play nice with Trump. They've been increasing their defense spending. They've been avoiding trade wars. They've been tiptoeing around him, hoping to keep America engaged at the NATO summit in June. They even agreed to that 5% target that Trump demanded, even though countries like France, Italy, and the UK know they can't actually afford it. But this new strategy document essentially said, nice try, but we're still backing away. And here's what makes it even more complicated. The document doesn't just talk about defense spending. It gets into culture and politics, warning about immigration and what it calls Europe's lack of civilizational self-confidence. It even suggests the U.S. should support right-wing movements in countries like Hungary, Poland, Austria, and Italy to pull them away from the European Union. The reactions to this have been pretty intense across the board. European leaders are trying to maintain composure, but you can tell they're rattled. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul came out and said Germany doesn't need outside advice, which is diplomatic speak for please mind your own business. The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz tried to be more measured, saying some of the strategy was understandable, but also emphasized that Europe needs to be much more independent from the U.S. in terms of security. That's a huge shift in thinking for Germany, which has relied on American protection since World War II. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, usually pretty diplomatic, wrote on social media, "Dear American friends, Europe is your closest ally, not your problem, and we have common enemies. At least that's how it's been in the last 80 years. That last part, that's him basically saying, are we not allies anymore? One of the harshest reactions came from Carl Bildt, the former Swedish Prime Minister. Who said the language in the document is something you'd usually only find coming out of bizarre minds in the Kremlin? A former French ambassador to the U.S., Gerard Araud, said the document reads like a far-right pamphlet and largely confirms that Trump is an enemy of Europe. Those are incredibly strong words from diplomats who usually measure every syllable back in the U.S. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal said the strategy foreshadows setbacks, forsaking allies, throwing Ukraine under the bus, and abandoning key strategic goals and basic values. Now, here's my take on this. And I'm just one guy with a camera and an opinion. This isn't just about defense spending anymore. This is about whether America wants to be part of the democratic alliance system that's existed since 1945, or whether we're going to become something else entirely. When Russia praises your national security strategy, when they say it aligns with their vision, that should make every American stop and think. Since World War II, NATO has been the bedrock of European security. Article 5 of the NATO treaty says an attack on one member is an attack on all. That guarantee, that promise, has prevented major wars in Europe for 80 years. And now we're essentially telling Europe that promise comes with conditions and we might not honor it. And let me take you behind the scenes a bit, because there's more to this story. According to reports, there was actually a longer version of this national security strategy that circulated internally before the public version came out. This longer draft was even more explicit about wanting to make Europe great again, which sounds familiar, and it specifically named countries like Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Poland as places the U.S. should work with to pull them away from the European Union. The White House later denied that this longer version existed, but multiple people saw it. So make of that what you will. Now, Trump's own former EU ambassador, Gordon Sondland, defended the strategy, saying if European countries want protection from Putin, they need to step up and look. There's actually a kernel of truth buried in there. European countries probably should spend more on their own defense, but the way this is being done, the harsh language, the threats, the implied abandonment, that's what's causing the crisis. Here's what's particularly interesting. Trump's first national security strategy, back in 2017, was totally different. That one talked about great power competition with Russia and China. It emphasized alliances. It was much more traditional. This new one barely mentions China except as an economic competitor, and it talks about strategic stability with Russia. That's a dramatic 180. If you're getting value from this deep dive, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. It really makes a difference for the channel. Thank you. So what's really going on here? Several analysts think Trump is trying to fundamentally reshape the international order. Instead of the U.S.-led system of alliances and democratic cooperation that has existed since 1945, Trump seems to want a more transactional world where America focuses on the Western Hemisphere and makes deals with whoever, including autocrats. The strategy even talks about accepting Middle Eastern leaders as they are, which is a pretty clear signal that human rights and democracy promotion are taking a back seat. The document also suggests that Trump wants to partner with regional champions to maintain stability rather than the U.S. doing it directly, and it hints at supporting political movements and parties aligned with American principles, which in practice seems to mean right-wing nationalist movements, even if they're anti-democratic. So what does all this mean going forward? Well, the immediate impact is that Europe is scrambling to figure out what to do if America really does step back. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who's generally been friendly with Trump, gave a speech saying Europe needs to take full responsibility for its own defense. She said, "For 80 years, we outsourced our security to the U.S., pretending it was free. But there was a price. Freedom has a price." That's a significant admission from a European leader. There's talk now about Europe potentially developing its own nuclear deterrent separate from America's nuclear umbrella. That's a massive, massive shift. Multiple European countries are also discussing using frozen Russian assets, about $200 billion worth, to fund Ukraine's defense. That would be a game changer. If it happens, the big question is whether NATO can survive this. Some experts think Trump can't actually pull the U.S. out because of that law Congress passed, but others point out he can effectively make NATO meaningless by just refusing to honor Article 5 or by withdrawing troops. And here's the thing about security guarantees. They only work if people believe them. Once doubt creeps in, once allies start thinking America might not show up, the whole system starts to crumble. Putin is absolutely watching this. He's seeing the cracks. And a lot of analysts are worried he might test NATO's resolve. maybe by making a move in the Baltic states or somewhere else in the periphery. If that happens and America doesn't respond strongly, NATO is effectively over. For Americans watching this, you might be thinking, why should we care about Europe's problems? And that's a fair question, but here's the thing. Every time America has tried to retreat from the world, chaos follows. After World War I, we went isolationist. And that helped set the stage for World War II. The whole reason we built this alliance system after 1945 was to prevent that from ever happening again. Look, I don't have a crystal ball. Maybe this all works out. Maybe Europe steps up. Maybe new arrangements emerge that are more balanced and fair. But what I do know is that tearing down something that has worked for 80 years without a clear plan for what comes next is really, really risky. If you found this analysis helpful, please hit that subscribe button and that like button. It genuinely helps the channel grow and lets me keep making content like this. Stay informed, stay engaged, and I'll see you in the next one.